Entering the sixth day of rescue efforts, prospects of finding survivors are dwindling as only bodies are found during operations on Sunday. The numbers reflect the tragic situation as the death toll rises to 64. The nation is inundated with grief, but support from the international community pours in. Hashtag pray for South Korea. Korea unites in support and prayer in what could be the worst tragedy of its kind to date as the country holds vigils and prayers on Korea Today, Monday, April 21st, 2014.
From Arirang News, this is Korea Today.
Hello, good to have you with us on Korea Today, brought to you live from Seoul. It's been more than 5 full days since a passenger ferry carrying 476 people sank in the southwestern coast of Korea.
The death toll has now risen to 64 and still 238 people are unaccounted for, close to 90% of them from a high school in Ansan. And with each passing hour, the possibility of finding survivors is becoming dimmer and dimmer.
And as of now, there are 174 survivors, many of them receiving treatment for physical injuries and psychological shock, some even suffering from survivor syndrome. And we'll be getting to that in a minute or so. But first, as we enter the sixth day of search and rescue efforts for the missing in the Sewol-ho ferry, as you heard, no word of any survivors. The death toll continues to rise and is regretfully expected to go up even more. We'll first go to our Ji Myung-gil at the Paengmokang Harbor. Myung-gil, can you give us the latest?
Unfortunately, the death toll has risen to 64. Just 4 hours ago, the rescue team discovered 2 bodies and were identified as 2 female students. They were found on the 4th floor cabins. The number of survivors remains unchanged at 174, and still 238 people, mostly children, remain missing. 5 days have passed since the capsizing of the Sewol-ho ferry, but many of the family members are clinging on to last bits of hope.
As you mentioned, 5 days have passed. It must be very difficult for the families right now, waiting in anguish for more news. Now, we've heard news that divers secured a new route into the Sewol-ho ferry.
Yes, that's true. Just by using the 5 guidelines, the divers were able to secure routes into the 3rd floor where the cafeteria is. They plan to go into the cafeteria in about an hour. The divers are also searching into the 4th floor where the cabins are. And to speed up operations on Monday, the rescue teams have deployed 213 Coast Guards, ships, and Navy vessels, 13 fishing boats, 35 aircrafts, and over 500 divers. The winds are blowing at a speed of 9 meters per second, which are improved conditions from yesterday. So the weather conditions look favorable with clear skies and calm tidal waves at 1 meter levels. Hopefully, the weather will work in favor of the rescue efforts. This was Ji Myung-gil reporting live from the Paengmokang Harbor.
We will wait for some positive results in the rescue efforts. In the meantime, the families of the missing, including the parents of the missing students, are becoming increasingly exhausted and angry as bodies turn up and details emerge about the struggling rescue operation. Our correspondent Hwang Ji-hye joins us live from a gymnasium near the accident site in Chindo, where many of the parents are. Ji-hye, what can you tell us?
Minjung, the air here is extremely heavy and it's getting very, very tense as divers continue to pull out bodies. While the families are trying to stay calm, some are yelling. Cries of grief were heard as they check a television screen showing a list of descriptions of the newly discovered bodies, of how the newly discovered bodies look like, so the families can see if they are the missing ones. Many It's extremely heartbreaking, and with no news updates of survivors, hopes are dimming for many families here. Many of them have been staying here since last Wednesday. They look absolutely exhausted, many barely able to eat or sleep. Rumors are also spreading among the families here about how rescue operations are going, how the bodies are being handled, and more. It seems like there's no trust on the authorities. I had a chance to talk with a volunteer worker here, and he said that trust is in short supply. Chung Jae-woo came here 3 days ago to offer a helping hand for families waiting for their missing loved ones here at the Jindo Auditorium. He says distrust is mounting here.
The government is not giving out exact answers to what the families here have asked for, so their anger seems to be running to an extreme. The families don't even trust each other, and there was a fight among them.
Minjung, I also had a chance to talk with the families waiting for their child to return, and they could barely speak. As soon as they started the conversation, they got all teary. They were unable to speak to us. Minjung?
I'm sure emotions are running high over there. Now, Prime Minister Chung Hong-won held closed-door talks with the families about the search and rescue operations. And do we have details from that meeting?
Well, no information about that as of now, but we do assume families are holding some talks right now because just a few hours ago, representatives of the families gathered in front of the podium for more private talks. All families want rescue operations to continue before authorities use huge cranes to refloat the sunken ferry just in case there are survivors, but hopes are fading fast. This was Hwang Ji-ae reporting live from the Jindo Auditorium.
As investigations continue in the Sewol-ho disaster, we now turn to our Eunice Kim at the News Center for new revelations from the tragedy. Eunice, a new probe has been opened, this time on the ferry company, and there's already been travel bans that's been issued.
That's right, Young. Many layers to this ongoing investigations. Police and prosecutors are jointly probing the cause of the accident, and they're now extending their investigation into the shipping company Chung Hae-jin. And as part of the probe, prosecutors have issued travel bans on some 40 people, including members of the owner family, the head management, as well as crew members to ensure that they do not leave the country.
And meanwhile, an audio file of the transcripts of the ferry's final communications were released yesterday. Now, this could be a major clue in piecing together the last moments leading to the captain and crew's escape and the ferry's final demise.
That's right. The audio file records what was said between the wheelhouse and the Marine Traffic Control Center in Jindo Island. It captured confusion and indecision, but no sign of an evacuation call. Here's Na Hyung-kyung with a minute-by-minute rundown.
Even if you speak Korean, it's difficult to make out what the two sides are saying. But what's evident is that the situation sounds quite dire. The joint investigation team composed of the police and the prosecution released the transcript on Sunday. The Sewol-ho ferry and the Jindo Vessel Traffic Service, which is the Marine Traffic Control Center, made contacts 11 times and communicated for 31 minutes. The control center first contacted the sinking ferry at 9:06 a.m. Wednesday. At 9:12 a.m., the ferry was already severely tilted. The crew member who was talking to the control center already knew that the people on board were not able to move. The control center told the ferry that the captain needs to decide whether to order passengers to abandon the vessel. That was around 9:25 a.m., but the ferry said it was unable to make announcements because the speaker system was down. And the last time the two made contact was at 9:37 a.m. when the ferry told the control tower that only the people who were able to escape to the left side of the ferry were able to leave the vessel. Whether the captain was in the steering room when the communications were being made is still unknown. Captain Lee Jun-seok is arrested and formally charged for escaping the ship before the passengers. Further investigation will determine whether the captain in fact did neglect his duty by not promptly notifying the passengers about the situation during that 30-minute time frame. 나현경, Arirang News.
Still, many questions remain, including the whereabouts of the captain during those final minutes. Meanwhile, the government has declared 2 areas affected by the accident as special disaster zones. Right, Eunice?
That's right. One is in Jindogun County in Jeollanam Province, where Pengmokhang Harbor is, and the other, the city of Ansan in Gyeonggi-do Province, where most of those high school students on the ferry were from. The disaster zone designations came last night, only the 7th in Korea's history, allowing the 2 areas to quickly receive state funds for the search and rescue operation and to receive special tax benefits. Financial assistance will also be given to the victims and their families, as well as to those still awaiting word of their loved ones. That's it from me for now. Back to you, Minjung.
So Chindo and Ansan have been designated as special disaster zones and will receive financial subsidies, but no amount of money or special attention could console the families who have lost their loved ones in this tragic incident. And many of the bodies are taken to the Korea University Ansan Hospital for funeral processions. We'll take things back to our reporter Kim Ji-yeon, who is standing by at the hospital live. Ji-yeon, tell us what it's like over there.
Minjung, I'm standing here at the funeral hall of the Ansan Korea University Hospital in the city of Ansan. This city located here is the home of most of the passengers, including 325 students, 326 students here. And the bodies from the southern part of the country are sent to this location. Family, friends, and the community are gathering to grieve and mourn for the fallen. The body of the vice principal of Daenon High School, who is identified by his surname Kang, was released this morning. Mr. Kang committed suicide due to the overwhelming guilt he felt at being rescued and being unable to help the students to safety. Some of the bodies of the students are also held at this hospital, but due to the parents' request, their release was postponed. But their bodies will be released at a later date at the group memorial altar, which will be set up on Wednesday at the Ansan Olympic Memorial Hall for students and teachers.
This story affects so many people, and so many people are traumatized by this story, including reporters like yourself, but mostly the residents of Ansan, where the students come from. How are they coping with the situation?
Not very well, apparently. Well, the Ansan, it's just outside the outskirts of the capital city of Seoul, and it has a population of 780,000, and it's a very vibrant city, and it's a very cohesive community. They know each other. One's friend is an acquaintance of the other. A son of a working colleague, a daughter from the community's mom and pop store. Upon news that they're missing, there's a hushed silence for several days now as the whole city mourns for the dead. More than 10 events that were scheduled normally around this time of the year had been canceled or postponed indefinitely. The warmth of the spring is not found in the city of Ansan. This is Kim Ji-yeon live at the Korea University Hospital in the city of Ansan.
Mokpo Hankook Hospital, where our Hyunbin just reported from, is where most of the survivors and the bodies of the deceased are sent to before they're transferred to other local hospitals. But in the case of the victims, identification of the bodies initially takes place at Pengmokhang Harbor, and this is why authorities have begun collecting DNA samples from the families of the missing passengers to make this process faster and more effective. Let's take a look at this next report and find out what procedures the bodies go through before they're received by their families.
This past Saturday, entering the 4th day since the Sewol-ho ferry capsized, rescue divers managed to enter the ship, and the search for missing passengers has intensified. But with more bodies being recovered, the number of lives lost continues to rise. How are the recovered victims being returned to their families? The recovered bodies are transported from the site of the sinking to Pengmokhang Harbor in Chindo Island, to a temporary coroner's office, where they attempt to identify the body through any personal items or physical characteristics. After identification, the deceased are sent to be held at a nearby hospital. But if authorities are unable to identify the victims, they are sent to Mokpo Hanguk Hospital or Mokpo Christian Hospital, where they conduct DNA tests. Even in cases where the body is identified using physical features, the authorities still conduct a DNA test before they confirm the identities. But as time continues to take a toll on the state of the bodies, DNA testing and verification is expected to become increasingly important. The majority of people on board the Sewol-ho ferry were high school students. If the students do not have their fingerprints registered with the government, they cannot rely on fingerprints like they do for adults. Once the condition of the body starts to deteriorate, DNA tests become a must in identifying the victims. The Joint Investigation Team began collecting DNA samples from the victims' families on April 19th, doing their best to speed up recovery efforts. The government's emergency management team is also stepping up its efforts to offer more support for grief-stricken families and to make sure their lost loved ones are returned to them as quickly as possible.
Survivors are currently being treated at the Mokpo Hanguk Hospital for physical injuries as well as acute shock, depression, extreme anxiety, and other psychological effects from this traumatic accident.
And the recovered bodies are being taken to this hospital as well. SJ Lee was on location over the weekend reporting from the scene, and he joins us in the studio this morning. Good morning to you, SJ.
Good morning, guys.
Now, it must have been quite an emotional scene being at the hospital and seeing bodies being carried in. I'm sure the families were on standby to see that happen right before their eyes, the bodies of their loved ones coming in. What was it like?
I honestly didn't know what to expect, to be honest with you. I went there, as soon as I arrived, there were 29 passengers that had arrived at the hospital. Of course, 11 of them were survivors. 8 had already left the hospital, and 10 have unfortunately arrived at the hospital deceased. Now, throughout the day, the first day I was there was relatively quiet. I mean, there was not a lot of information that came from the hospital. No one knew what was going on. And then the second day that I was there, pretty much the same thing. I mean, we were getting all these information. Some of the head officials came out and said, well, the 10 bodies that were recovered earlier in the day were heading over to the hospital. Now, of course, it takes about hour and a half for the bodies to come over to the hospital. But hours and hours have passed. None of the bodies have arrived. And in fact, some of the family members who found out that the bodies were arriving, in order for them to see if it was any of their family members, they actually arrived at the hospital. Later to find out the bodies didn't arrive at the hospital. They found out some of them were students. They were quickly transferred over to Ansan, where the family members actually took a bus back to Ansan as well. Of course, shortly afterwards, I was able to, at 4 p.m., actually, one of the first ambulances of the day actually arrived, and you can't describe the kind of atmosphere it was at that moment. And I remember standing there, cameramen there, reporters there, just utter silence. And probably one of the things that I'll never probably forget is as soon as the ambulance opened up, 2 of the family members did come out of the ambulance, which meant that the body was identified. And then shortly afterwards, of course, the body was stretchered out. And, you look at the facial expression, the kind of emotions that the family members were going through, you can't describe that.
No words can describe
exactly
what that must feel like.
And 30 minutes later, another ambulance did come, and this time, no family member.
Okay, which means that that body was not identified at the point. You mentioned that in the first ambulance that arrived first, there were 2 family members that exited the vehicle along with the body, which means that they were identified at the Pengmokhan Harbor, where there is a temporary coroner's office that is set up there. So once it does come in, bodies that are not identified during that process, they go through a DNA testing at the hospital over there, right?
All the family members, they're going to do some kind of DNA testing, just in case they find their loved ones.
Everybody, whether it's been identified or not at Pengmokhan.
Exactly, and the way that it goes is, obviously we're on the 6th day of the accident now, and as time keeps passing, it's going to be harder and harder for them to identify the bodies. And it seems like if the family members are able to, even if the family members are, let's say, able to identify the body, there's so many family members out there so desperately looking for their family members that they think it's their loved ones. So they need to still make sure and do DNA testing. But there are cases where, I don't want to describe it too graphically, but from what I heard from some of the reporters and some of the officials at the hospital, some of the bodies deteriorated so much that you can't identify them. So they're, at the scene, it's difficult for them to even identify them at the scene. So they are taken to nearby hospitals where further tests are being done. And then, of course, shortly afterwards, the family members are then alerted.
Okay, so once the identification is complete through DNA testing, what happens to the bodies? You mentioned some of them get transported to Ansan.
Right. It seems like all the students, basically, they are quickly transferred over to Ansan. For all the other passengers who aren't students, basically the family members who find out, if it is their family member, they have a choice to which hospital they're sent to. Now, of course, like I said, the hospital where I was at, Mokpo Hanguk Hospital, we were getting information that, several bodies were recovered and they're supposed to come over to the hospital. What happens is there's 3 different hospitals nearby, and they're, in some ways, it's like as if it's randomly, hospitals are randomly selected. We don't know if the bodies are coming, how many bodies are coming, and when they're going to come. So basically, I had the chance to talk to some of the people involved at the scene, and they were saying the family members choose which hospital they go.
So they don't know where it's going to be?
No. Not at all.
So going over to the survivors, now they're being treated for their physical injuries, but we hear that the bigger problem is that they're mentally very shocked and have a severe anxiety and depression right now. And the hospital has even forbidden anyone to visit these patients except for the family members. How are they coping with the situation?
Now, the first night I was there, I had a chance to speak to one of the survivors, a middle-aged man, and he was telling me that he was suffering from a broken rib, and he said he was one of the lucky ones. And, when I was talking to him, it seemed he was, perfectly fine until he started telling me that, his wife is still missing. And I knew he was getting emotional. And that's when I said, I can't talk to him anymore because this is obviously hard for him.
Because... Right, and there is a condition known as the survivor's guilt,
right,
where the survived passengers must be feeling like, how come I survived when hundreds of people could be dead in the cold waters underneath that
And he was especially feeling that because what he was telling me was because of the weather conditions, he said his wife did not want to go on that trip. But what happened was because they had already parked the car inside the ship, they can't take it out. So he was saying, oh, you know what, we have the car in there, let's just go, nothing's going to happen.
Oh, no.
And as soon as he said that, there were some reporters nearby just, listening in, they just couldn't take it anymore. Everywhere you could see all the reporters just scattering around, let's just leave it as it is. And it seems like, according to all the doctors, all the survivors are going through some kind of post-traumatic stress at this point, roughly half of them taking medication, which shows that it is very severe.
And right, reporters have to respect their privacy as well.
Exactly.
Well, thank you, SJ.
Always a pleasure.
Good morning. Now let's run through the front pages of your newspapers. The entire nation is under a dark cloud since the past week's Sewol-ho ferry tragedy, and we'll begin with Chosan-ilbo today and start with this headline here. The headline says, Sewol-ho ferry, should we evacuate versus the Coast Guard, saying the captain should make the call. The Daily says that the two sides were passing the buck, as it turns out that the sunken ferry's Sewol-ho's crew may have delayed evacuating the passengers despite repeated instructions to do so. Now, this disclosed communications log detailing the conversation between the Sewol-ho ferry and the Jindo vessel traffic service showed that the crew was told on a number of occasions to implement emergency measures. However, Sewol-ho's communications officer concentrated on whether the Coast Guard was on its way without relaying the orders to the passengers. And if we take a look at this headline towards the bottom here, it says, why have you come back this way? You were smiling when you left. Come to mom. Now, these are some of the words coming out from the devastated parents of the children sacrificed in the tragedy, as a few bodies were recovered at Paengmokgang Harbor in Chindo Island, which is where the authorities are bringing in the bodies. And moving on to 동아일보, we'll take a look at the top headline here. It says, a precious 43 minutes completely gone to waste. Just as a story on 조선일보 that we previously just looked at pointed out, almost an hour following the first report of the distress situation to the Chindo VTS was shamefully lost, with multiple transmissions of communication between the Sewol-ho ferry and the Chindo VTS having been extremely inefficient. If you take a look at this picture, it's showing one of the first funerals that were held for the students from Kanon High School in Ansan early yesterday. And moving on to 중앙일보, the top headlines, it's emphasizing that the captain and crew members evacuated and abandoned the ship. The headline says the captain and crew members evacuate after gathering on the bridge of the ship. Now, the bridge is the room where the ship is commanded from, which is where a number of the crew members were holding out on at the time of the incident, which is when they sensed that something had gone wrong. Now, when the communication with the VTS ended, most of the captain and crew members evacuated and were rescued. Moving on to 경향신문, we'll take a look at this headline here at the bottom. Excuse me. The headline towards the bottom here. We'll have a look at this one. It's the words coming from the parents of the students that are missing. And it says, 5 days in the freezing cold waters, please help pull them out. And many of the parents collapsed to the floor sobbing when the bodies of their children were recovered, while some of the families said that at this stage they would at least like to recover the body of their lost child. And if we go on to the Mail Business newspaper, this is a very touching picture. It's showing a policewoman wiping away her own tears as well as the tears of a woman yesterday on site. If you take a look at this headline at the bottom here, you did hear earlier in the headlines too, the government declares Chindo Island and Ansan as special disaster zones. The government yesterday designated 2 areas directly linked to the deadly sinking of the ferry as special disaster zones to speed up state financial and other support for the families of the victims. And that was a look at your newspaper headlines for this Monday. And coming up are the stock numbers from Friday.
We heard from Myung-gil at the top of the hour that the winds of the coast of Chindo Island are blowing at about 6 meters per second, which is significantly calmer than the conditions rescuers have been facing and struggling with for the past few days.
And the currents as well as visibility seem to be a bit more cooperative with the ongoing rescue efforts. We'll now go to Chun Song-cho for a closer look at the weather in the area. Song-cho, good morning.
Good morning, guys. Yes, the conditions are improving as now we have a high-pressure system over the southern sea, and Chindo Island is right here where rescuers are working around the clock to find people inside the sunken ferry. Currently, the winds are blowing at 3.6 meters per second of speed, generating a 0.6 meter high waves. Also, now we're in the neap tidal cycle, so the difference between high and low tides is minimal, progressively slowing down the currents, and it'll bring the speed down to about 1.6 meters per second by Thursday. And this is going to improve visibility underwater since there will be less particles floating around. And if you see over here, here are the hours when the tide turns and the currents flow at their slowest at less than 0.5 meters per second. So underwater operations can be taken during these hours 2 more times today at 1:09 p.m. and 6:40 p.m. Now taking a look at the details of the forecast, like I said earlier, the conditions in general are better than what we've had so far. The maximum speed of winds is at 9 meters per second, and the height of waves will rise up to 1 meter. The temperature of the waters is relatively warmer as well at approximately 13 degrees Celsius. And with that, let me give you an update on the weather conditions for the rest of the peninsula. It looks like the temperatures will stay on the warm side for the rest of the week. Starting today, we have warm air continuously blowing from the west, bringing the temperature slightly above the annual average. The conditions will be mostly clear nationwide, but partly cloudy in the southern regions and Jeju past midday. Some parts may be blanketed by heavy fog, so be careful on your morning commute. This is all for me with the weather update.
Still ahead on Korea Today, coming together in prayer is what Koreans have been doing since the Sewol-ho passenger ferry sunk off of the southern coast. Many are clinging on to hope and sending their messages of support towards those who have been affected. But up next, Simon Oh has more on the support from around the globe.
Good morning. My name is Simon Oh. With the entire nation engulfed in sadness over the Sewol-ho ferry accident, the web has become a channel for messages of hope and support from people all over the world. So this morning, that's what we'll be taking a look at. First up, everyone who has heard news of the Sewol-ho incident has been deeply moved by the tragedy, including a number of prominent sports stars. Just yesterday, Son Heung-min of the Bundesliga appeared on the pitch for his match against Nuremberg with a black patch on his sleeve. Having expressed his dismay over the accident in an interview beforehand, he kept the patch on his arm throughout the entire match, sharing the nation's sadness. Additionally, in the Korean baseball matchup between the Doosan Bears and the Lotte Giants, Doosan players showed up with the phrase "Safe Return" on their hats in an additional show of support. And also, as you see in these photos, Korean golfers who participated in the LPGA Lotte Championships last Friday showed their support by wearing black ribbons on their hats. And finally, Ryu Hyun-jin of the LA Dodgers has been very proactive in his response to the tragedy, offering to donate as much as roughly $100,000 US. His efforts haven't ended there. More recently, he held a gathering to sign autographs, again in support of the Sewol-ho victims, and many are applauding his positive and very proactive approach. Celebrities from all over the world are also offering their condolences for the victims and their families, with messages on social media sites. Let's have a look at some of the things that they had to say. Watching a report on the South Korea ferry sinking, my heart goes out to all those people waiting for unaccounted relatives. That's one message by singer Mika on his Twitter account. We see some of the updates on his posts there. British singer Connie Talbot announced through her Twitter account that she will donate the proceeds from her upcoming concert here in Korea to the victims of the Sewol-ho ferry incident. Furthermore, Arsenal defender Per Mertesacker posted a message of support, including "hoping for a miracle," written in Korean or Hangul. We see how he added his message for the Korean audience and his Korean fans at the bottom of his post here. And finally, Pope Francis has also posted a message on his Twitter account asking his followers to join him in praying for the victims of the disaster. The Pope offering his support for those involved in the Sewol-ho ferry sinking. It looks like even more people all over the world are coming together to offer their prayers. Let's move on now to our next story. Here's a question for you. Have you ever been able to understand someone despite not knowing their language? I think once you see these next videos, you'll understand what I'm talking about. They are tribute videos posted online by people all over the web offering their support. I'll let them have their say for a moment.
Survives. Pray for South Korea. You guys, let's pray. Let's seriously pray that they survive, that they come out of this, that 여러분 같이 기도할 거야.
I think you can feel how heartfelt the messages in the videos are, regardless of whether you speak the language. In fact, as I was prepping for today's show, I saw some of those videos with the sound turned off, and nonetheless, I think the thoughts and the hopes do definitely come through. And hopefully, all these prayers may offer even the slightest bit of help to overcome the unimaginable difficulties that the victims of this tragic incident are going through. Now, moving on to our final story today. Pray for South Korea started to trend on Twitter directly after the Sewol-ho ferry accident occurred. And even now, the hashtag is appearing with words of condolences from people all over the world. The hashtag is used by Twitter users to offer their prayers for Korea. Along with it, they're leaving messages and images in a variety of different languages. But of all the different messages that we've seen so far, there is one in particular that is gaining the most attention of all. The image I speak of course, is a drawing by an online user in Thailand, drawn after learning about a 5-year-old girl who was rescued from the ferry alone, with the rest of her family still missing. The draw is touching the hearts of many and is about the story of Kwan and her 6-year-old brother who was wearing a life vest, but gave it to her instead and helped her to escape. With Kwan's older brother and parents still unaccounted for, the drawing contains a message trying to reassure her that everything will be okay. These messages of support and prayer continue to emerge online in hopes that they may lift up the hearts of everyone who has been affected by the Sewol-ho ferry accident. Sometimes, perhaps the worst of times, bring out the best in some of us. I'm Simon O. That's all I have for you today.
And we're entering the 6th day following the incident, and now Cha-Mina joins us with a little bit more on what is happening domestically. Mina, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning to you both. The past few days have been very challenging for, of course, family members awaiting for good news, but for the country as a whole, we're seeing, and these past few days, we've seen the country as a whole collectively come together and try to contribute in a variety of ways, whether it be through prayer or through candlelight vigils. So we're going to be taking a look at some of the ways, some of the many ways that the whole country has come together these past couple of days and will continue to do so. So we'll take a look at this more closely in this report. An accident that has left so many in disbelief. People all over the country had their eyes and ears fixed on news of the ferry disaster. It was to share the weight of the tragic accident and console families who were told by their children that they love them and that they shouldn't worry. Events all over the country scheduled in time for spring have been canceled or postponed, including a massive culture festival that was scheduled for this weekend at Seoul Plaza. Weekend primetime. Laughter has faded from what would normally be a fierce entertainment competition between major television networks. And with one of Korea's favorite sports, baseball season, in full swing, all the loudspeakers and cheerleaders have disappeared from the stadiums. All that is left is the players who solemnly play without any cheering or events.
I think it's a given that the entire country should share the spirit of mourning, as it is truly a heartbreaking incident.
Help is coming from all over the country to support the families still overlooking the site of the accident and workers involved in the rescue operations. More than 5,000 volunteers have descended upon the site, and relief goods continue to pour into Jindo Island and Tanwan High School. Over the weekend, people gathered to hold candlelight vigils, unable to simply watch things unfold on television. On April 19th, some 280 civic groups gathered in Seoul's Cheonggye Square to hold a candlelight vigil, wishing for the safe rescue of those still missing in the Sewol-ho ferry sinking. Other vigils are being held near Ansan Danwon High School, where most of the victims came from, and the movement is spreading to all over the country, mourning the loss of others.
I wanted to help in any way that I could, so I joined the candlelight vigil. I really hope that with the whole country coming together, that a miracle will happen.
People in Korea are sharing the pain as if it is a loss of their own, something the country has experienced in times of need before. During the 1997 Asian financial crisis, the Korean public donated their wedding rings and other gold items to help the country pull out of the economic crisis. And after one of the worst oil spills off the Taean coast in 2007, recovery was possible after many volunteers helped clean up. Regardless of whether it is for good or bad times, the nation has been able to come together, setting individual needs aside and sharing a spirit of unity.
Korea has a strong collective sentiment. This is something that is just as important as collective intelligence. The entire country is sharing the sentiment that the students in the sinking ship are not simply children of other families, but actually part of an extended family. This is the force that brings the country together as one.
You know, this spring has been anything but springy, and you turn on the radio and all you hear is just soft music and a lot of people writing in to say how sorry they are about this tragic accident. If you go out to the streets, you see no one really cheering or laughing. It seems like the country is mourning together.
Absolutely. This was the first weekend after the ferry accident occurred, and usually you see families and friends getting together, being outdoors, especially at this time of the year, because there are a lot of festivals to ring in the spring season. But you saw a lot less of that this weekend. It was very, very subdued. The entire environment in Korea, you saw people going out less people in tourist hotspots, for instance, and less people were found to be going to movies. Movies are usually a big spot to go to during the weekends, but you see a lot of the activities being subdued this weekend, as well as many events and festivals being canceled and also scaled back.
That's right. Hobby clubs have also scaled back on their meetings and their activities as well, and variety programs have been canceled on many of the terrestrial broadcast stations. What are some of the other entertainment related events that are being canceled, Mina?
Well, we saw a lot of the major television broadcasters, as you mentioned, canceling the entertainment programs. Also for the artists and shows, concerts and so forth, those activities were also canceled. We saw this weekend and within the past couple of days as well. Some K-pop artists, for instance, they were scheduled to come out with their new albums, new songs being released. But in this time of communal mourning, those events were also either postponed for now indefinitely, and we're also seeing concerts that were scheduled here, some entertainment events. They are also being pushed back at the moment, either that or being in tribute to the victims or those involved in the tragedy.
Right, and for the baseball games as well, it was really touching to see how they went without the cheering. How are these games playing out?
Well, on the day of the accident, on the 16th, the Korean Baseball Organization immediately sent out messages to all of the baseball clubs in the country saying that they wished for no cheerleaders, for instance, and the games to be a little bit on the played silently. And this was, of course, in tribute to what's happening. And it seems that every day as the events are unfolding and the situation is very serious, these subdued games, I guess you could say, they're going to be continuing, and we're going to be seeing more quiet games for now. People still coming out. We saw many people still attending the games, and baseball games are still ongoing, being that we are in baseball season. However, the continued environment.
Excessive cheering is not
Absolutely, that's not going to be happening for a while.
And I believe that there's going to be another candlelight vigil at the Ansan Danwon High School, right?
Absolutely, where many of the students who were on the ferry, they attended the Danwon High School in Ansan, and there has been a candlelight vigil every day, every night at that school, and we're seeing more and more people participating. Just on Saturday, it was reported some 2,000 people were part of the candlelight vigil at the high school, and that was a fourfold from just last week when things first unfolded. So we're seeing more people participate in the candlelight vigil and coming out, not just people who are affiliated with the school or have connection to the students, just people who are not involved with it directly. We're seeing them all come together though as a whole, and therefore again, we're just seeing the whole nation come together during this time.
Yep, the numbers have reached thousands and it's increasing. But speaking of candlelight vigils, there's been more at universities around the world. Specifically, we reported on a couple of vigils that went on in Boston.
That's right. In Boston and all over the world, we're seeing a lot of people come together for victims and to remember this tragedy in Korea. For the Korean students and the student councils in the city of Boston in particular, we saw them hold a large-scale candlelight vigil in remembrance of this incident in Korea. We saw students from a variety of universities in the Boston area, because there are a lot of universities there, students coming together. Whether you're Korean or not, we saw a big community gathering there and coming together for this sole purpose.
And not only the vigils, people are taking part in fundraisers to help the families of the victims. Right.
Absolutely, especially online, because the situation is, of course, very serious. We're seeing a lot of different fundraising events for this incident pop up. And online, we heard just about 100 million won, that's about $100,000 being raised by one portal site. So that's one of many, and we're going to be continuing to see an outpour of people who do want to contribute. Whether you join a vigil or whether you donate to a fundraiser, there are going to be a variety of ways you can contribute, for sure. That will continue to pop up as well.
Well, this is not region specific. This is affecting the whole nation, the provinces of Chungcheongdo, Gyeongsangdo, Gangwon-do, you name it. Everyone is affected and everyone is praying. Thank you, Mina, for this.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mina.
Now, before we go, let's check back in with our Eunice Kim, who joins us from the news center. The official death toll is now at 61. We'll be right back. Actually, the death toll from this tragic incident stands at 64, and we'll get the latest from our Eunice Kim, who is standing by at the news center. Eunice, has there been an update in the past hour?
Well, Minjung, this just in, we're learning that investigators have issued arrest warrants on some 4 suspects, including the chief engineer. This as they are expanding their probe into the Cheonghaejin Shipping Company, issuing travel bans on some 40 people, including the ship's crew and members of the owner family. They'll also look into why the Sewol-ho ferry reached out to the Marine Office, a traffic control center on Jeju Island first at 8:55 a.m., which is further from the Marine Company, or rather further from the Marine Traffic Control Center in Jindo, losing some 12 minutes of the so-called golden time to get the passengers off the doomed ship.
And Eunice, a lot to pour over there. Now, meanwhile, investigators are also looking into the condition of the Sewol-ho ferry. The ship is known to have been renovated a couple of times from its previous form. Now, when was it? It was imported from Japan, but apparently there were some alterations that were made to the ship, some major ones.
Right. The Sewol-ho ferry was already a 20-year-old ship when it was imported, and according to a report submitted to the Financial Supervisory Service by the ferry company, the ship underwent months of renovation to extend its sailing life by about a decade. So they'll pore over that. Meanwhile, we are hearing of more cases of phone scams and smishing, so users should be vigilant while investors try to get a handle on people taking advantage of a bad situation. Investigators will also work with popular messaging application KakaoTalk to try and piece together the accident using the text messages sent and received by the passengers on board. And looking forward, guys, around noon, rescue teams will focus their search efforts on the 3rd and 4th levels of the ship, utilizing a remotely operated vehicle as well. The team at Arirang News, of course, will keep you updated on the latest every hour, but for now, we'll toss it back to you in the studio.
Hopefully, the rescue teams will be able to find some survivors on the 3rd and 4th floors. Well, there we have it. The death toll stands at 64. Do stay with us for our 12 o'clock news bulletin for more updates on this ferry disaster.
And we will see you back here tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. Min Jung and I. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.